All righty. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on sales and marketing alignment. Very excited that y'all are here. We're going to give folks a couple minutes to file on into the room. In the meantime, maybe a little bit of housekeeping. We obviously are recording this session. So if you have to leave early, or if you've got some colleagues you want to check out the content and comments from our great speakers today, we'll have that available for you afterward. I think we've got a sales and marketing alignment best practice guide that if you're attending today, we'll be able to get to you as well. And I know our guests today have some great content of their own on the sales and marketing alignment front that we'll get to. We were just talking before about, it was my fault. Cause like we literally, like a normal webinar, like we all joined a couple minutes, like 15 minutes early to make sure that the tech bugs are kicked out, and leave it to me 2 minutes beforehand to ask Jay about his barbecue game. Jay has a collection of smoking devices. We were starting to talk about hardware. And of course, like I'm ready to start talking. I don't know if you ever seen, Jay, the barrel cooker, right? Where basically you have charcoal. It's basically an oil barrel, specially made oil barrel. There's charcoal at the bottom, and then there's rods at the top, and you hang your meat or veggies or shrimp or whatever over the charcoal.
I haven't seen that, but and now I need one.
Yeah, you definitely need one. It's my favorite way. It's my new favorite way to cook like half chickens. Like I'll do a dry brine for 2 days for a half chicken and then hang them over the coals. And then the fat drips on the coal and then the vapor base it. Yeah, I'm sorry for the vegetarians that are joining us, but it's pretty awesome. All right, so let's get going. We got a bunch of people joining us. I think some people, I know that there were a couple people that are going to join us late. We're going to make this very sort of casual and conversational, but we've got a lot of topics we want to get into today. So if you don't know me, my name is Matt Heinz. We're hosting this session today on sales and marketing alignment. What are some of the common challenges? What are still some of the roadblocks, and how do we solve for them in the market today? Very excited to have with us two people that have been tackling this problem for a long time. Not that they're old, but they know their stuff on this topic. First, I guess, like Sally Duby from the Bridge Group. You see behind her the book that her colleague Trish Bertruzzi wrote. The Sales Development Playbook has really become the Bible for sales development over the last several years. If you haven't read that, definitely get a copy. Sally herself, one of the top women in sales and most influential women in sales, ranked a number of different times. And Sally, really excited you could join us here today.
Thanks so much, Matt. And I'm looking forward to representing the sales side of the equation in this discussion.
Well, we all represent, I think, hopefully a little bit of both, right? And so
yes,
I think
absolutely.
Sally for sure, sort of bringing a little more on the sales side. Jay, again, like, having worked both of these sides, but, in addition to his barbecue game, former analyst, chief marketing officer with Serious Decisions and Forrester, and now newly minted head of marketing at AgentSync. And Jay, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, so here's how this is going to work. I have a whole bunch of questions. We were joking earlier that we could probably go for a few hours on this. We have less than an hour. We want to make sure we get everyone back to their midweek work day. If you have a question for our panel, please feel free to use the Q&A feature within Zoom. Feel free to use the chat as well to chat amongst yourselves. Sally and Jay and I will be watching that chat as well and happy to engage there. Depending on what kind of question you have, if we may actually ask you to pull you into the panel and sort of bring you on screen and ask you that question as well. Make this kind of fun and interactive. But let's kick it off with, I guess, foundationally, like when we hear sort of certain terms in our industry, sometimes we all have different definitions of what they are. And maybe Sally, let's start with you. When I say sales and marketing alignment, what does that mean for you?
Wow. Okay. This is one of those questions we could go on for a long time about, but to try to succinctly, give you an answer on this, I'll say that sales and marketing moving in the same direction, going after the same things, accomplishing the same goals, and understanding what each is contributing into sales, and what can be expected of each, because we each owe the other team something, right? Marketing obviously owes sales some stuff, but sales also owes marketing information back, and making sure that we're doing everything within our teams to make that happen. And along with making sure that the poor SDR team that's kind of caught in the middle is also part of that equation and is not left out of the conversation. And
we're
I'll
going to
leave
talk
it
about both of those things over the
Yeah.
course of the next few minutes, both the poor SDR team, which, I mean, literally sometimes you are really caught in the middle, not just in terms of sort of what's asked of them, but who owns them and who's to be managing them. And you used a word that I think is really interesting. And Jay, I guess I want to throw this question to you as well. You know, the idea of like who owes what. Right. And I think over the years, we've seen a lot of companies bring out like service level agreements to say, okay, let's document like what's required between those two teams. It seems like at that point, you're legislating what needs to happen versus having, you know, maybe more natural sort of organic alignment. So what does good sales and marketing alignment mean for you from what you've seen on both sides of the fence?
Sure. Yeah, and I have seen it on both sides of the fence. And my time at Sirius, 10 years there, because we were founded on this idea that we could help sales and marketing align better. I got to see it across a lot of companies. So for me, I mean, Sally gave a great answer, and mine's pretty much the same. I guess the way I would say it is that it's sales and marketing alignment is when the two functions are working towards a shared goal based on a shared plan, hopefully. And that plan is built on a shared understanding of their audience and markets. And by that, I mean, not just kind of, segments, but all the way down to personas and understanding how purchase decisions are made. And that to me is kind of the foundation of good alignment, that shared understanding of the audience.
Shared understanding of audience. And when you say audience, I assume we mean both account and contacts, right? Like go ahead.
Yeah. So segments, accounts, all the way down to those buyer personas as well. And inclusive of kind of, a buyer's journey map. I always cringe when I say buyer's journey map because, people perceive that to mean like, oh, we're going to sit down and detail this rock solid understanding of the exact sequence of things that happen that lead to a purchase. And it's never that, right? It's always variable. There's always, different things that can lead to a purchase, but it's a shared understanding that, hey, typically there's a series of decisions that lead to somebody usually buying from us, all the way down to that. And that's part of that understanding of the audience and who's involved in making those purchase decisions too.
Yeah. I saw your comment here, Sally, about respect. And I think, the idea, if SLAs have to legislate who owes what, you're already starting from a footing that sort of feels like we're sort of pulling what we need from folks. When we work with companies on whether it's an account-based motion or just trying to help companies build more predictable pipeline and complex sales processes, one of the biggest challenges and sometimes one of the most important pieces of getting that done is to understand and impact the culture. Like, how do these teams actually work and operate together? Do they agree not just on objectives and definitions, but are they okay when they go to battle? When you work on Tuesday, like, do you actually respect each other? Talk a little bit about how you think about that respect function.
Yeah, so I think I've just had a couple conversations this week actually about this, and there was some tension because sales was very frustrated. They were actually getting in hot leads that if there was an SLA that the SDRs had to respond within 10 minutes, and the name was Yes Sirree Bob that came through, and that was a hot lead. And so, that tends to break sort of that trust and respect aspect. But then by the same token, sales and SDRs can go off at this tangent and say, we get nothing but, junk in from marketing, but we're not quantifying it, and we're not really capturing how much is really junk versus good stuff. So, are we oversimplifying things and just saying, the vast majority is junk? And without, again, the right tracking and measuring to really understand and to set things in perspective, we start losing a lot of that respect for what each is contributing and what each can do. And I think, again, that's where we got to keep each other kind of honest. And what I think we owe each other on the teams is to make sure that we really understand what we're saying is the truth, or are we doing a little exaggeration here and there?
Yeah. I mean, there's the being honest with each other. And there's also, I think, the recognition that, like, best laid plans don't always survive contact with the battlefield, right? We can go into sales kickoff and say, we're aligned on objectives. We've got a common playbook. Here's the type of leads we're going to generate. It never works that easily or consistently, right? So when you get into the quarter and you're working through this stuff, like whether it's adjustments or grace or other elements of this, like what are some, like, especially for the leaders who are sort of setting an example, like how do you recommend sales and marketing leaders sort of embrace those adjustments and that sort of ambiguity of how execution ends up happening?
Yeah, so I'll start on that one. And in fact, Sally, what you were describing is one of the reasons that I do appreciate SLAs. I've helped a lot of companies implement them, and typically they were to fix misalignment across sales and marketing, right? It's already broken. There's a rift that exists. So let's start by documenting and kind of codifying the process, the end-to-end process, and who's responsible for what. Even when alignment is good and that mutual respect is there, I think SLAs can be good, you know, and it's not supposed to be draconian in terms of like enforcement of these things. But I'll give you an example of what I mean. So in a healthy funnel, one of the stages should be the stage at which a receiving function, whether it's a BDR or a quota carrying AE, for example, receives a lead from marketing. Their first job is to kind of look at it and accept it or reject it, right? And in an SLA, I like to see marketing on the hook to say, look, we want to get to the point where 90% of what we send over is accepted and only 10% is rejected. And if that's documented, that means there's been a discussion in advance and an understanding that, hey, not everything is going to meet the criteria we agreed upon, right? And not everything's going to be perfect. There's going to be missteps. You're going to get the occasional, you know, Donald Ducks in there, even though we have processes in place to try to catch that stuff. And you know, that's one benefit of kind of documenting the process at least and setting goals, because SLAs aren't just about rules, it's about goals. And again, if marketing can say, look, we're going to try to get to 90% of what we send over being accepted, which means it meets that criteria and the rep agrees they're going to start working it, then we're pretty good. But at the leadership level, I think that the main thing is engagement, buy-in, and somebody already said it, communication, and there really can't be enough, both on the sales and marketing side from leaders about, hey, this is important. And let's face it, a lot of alignment, not all of it, but a lot of alignment is alignment around demand, right? That end-to-end process, and SDRs or BDRs are in the middle of it. And if everybody sees, hey, we planned for this, we have a process, it's communicated to us. For example, when we bring on new sales reps, it's part of their onboarding, they learn about this process. I think that goes a long way to making it work and helping people understand that it's a value in the business.
Yeah. Thank you to those of you who completed the first poll that we've thrown up here. I'm going to share the results here real quick. We asked you, how well do you think you understand sales and marketing alignment? We were talking about definitions to begin the session here today. We're going to follow up with a question that asks, how good are you at this, right? So there's the, how well do I understand it? And then how well are we doing it? Sort of spoiler alert, we usually see a gap there. But interesting to see. I would expect this to be a relatively, more advanced audience than normal, but, looks like majority are, I think, understand it. I'm confident. Maybe you're all a bunch of humbles folks who say you're not yet a pro. But we got to start somewhere, right? So in a few minutes, we'll throw the next question up, which is really around, okay, how well do you understand it? How aligned do you think your organizations are today, and how well are you doing this? I want to get to this question from Alexandra, though, around sort of the VP responsible for sales and marketing, and whether you see someone whose title is head of sales and marketing, or someone who might be sort of the chief revenue officer. It seems like to Sally, it seems to me like 4 times out of 5, if I see someone who's the CRO, you look at their background and it's mostly in sales. So you could argue like, oh, we're going to put one person formally in front of both of these. In a lot of those organizations, it can feel like sales won, right? And then marketing is somewhat of an afterthought. Companies don't operate very well when that's the mentality. But what do you recommend in organizations where you have sort of a single owner of sales and marketing to ensure those functions, the required functions there, are operating as productively as possible?
Yeah, I don't know that it's any different from whether you've got 2 set owners. I mean, it's constant, communication and where you align, what are our goals and what are we expecting of you? So, one of the things where we like to start with is, where does the company want the revenue to come from, right? what market segments, verticals, size companies, whatever. Is it all new business? How much from new logos versus existing accounts? All those kinds of things. And then to understand, based on those goals of where we're expecting our revenue to come from, what are the percentages of contribution to pipeline and where are they coming from? So how much is marketing responsible for in those various segments? How much are the SDR, BDR team, if they're doing more outbound than inbound, responsible for, or even inbound? How much are the AEs responsible for? If you've got channel partners, how much are the channel partners, if they're bringing in leads, responsible for, in any other areas where that's coming in? And if you understand what all of those overlying goals are and objectives, and you're reporting on them, how well are we contributing to them? I think that's a really good starting point. And bringing examples in of, hey, I'm not placing blame on anybody, but can we look at this yes sirree Bob lead that came in and figure out, how did that get through? Is it just a system malfunction that sometimes happens? Or is there something in our lead scoring? Or we actually had, an organization that when they weren't meeting their MQL goals, they would, that were very defined, and where they were the right company, the right people and all of that. But when they didn't have enough of those on a month, they would open up the floodgates to things that didn't meet those requirements, right? So, kind of coming in non-accusatory, not laying blame, not calling people names, but here's some examples of some things that I, weren't supposed to get through. Can we figure out how they got through and fix it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I want to continue that thread just around sort of, warning signs and sort of, key problem areas to look at. And Jay, I want to sort of throw this at you. First of all, I want to point out Jay's on vacation, believe it or not. You wouldn't know that by the fact that it's the middle of the week and he's doing a webinar. He didn't disclose this information to us when he agreed to do this. Otherwise, we would have either rescheduled or kicked him out. His vacation. For those of you that are joining from our company, you know how important PTO is to me and just going off the grid. But regardless, Jay, really appreciate you joining from whatever boathouse you're in right now. But yeah, you've seen this movie before, right? You've seen, both from your CMO roles. At your time at Serious Decisions and Forrester, you saw countless organizations, attempt to do this and sort of find those stumble points. For companies that are trying to raise their game around sales and marketing alignment, what are some early warning signs they should be looking for to make sure they address those and try to resolve those before it becomes a bigger problem?
Sure. There's a whole slew of early warning signs. The most obvious one is leads that are dormant, right? That are just sitting there. And that's the thing I saw over and over again at Serious Decisions. You've got marketing teams that are spending tons of money and effort, creating leads, delivering leads, and those leads are not being at least visibly acted upon and are not being advanced in the ways that you would expect them to be. That's an obvious one. And in that scenario, I'll say this, it's nobody's fault typically on either side. People will oftentimes say, well, that's just sales not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But typically that's the result of a much earlier issue, which is that, hey, we haven't actually really agreed upon what a lead is here. And guess what? Sales reps are really smart. They want to hit their numbers. And if those leads are good, they're going to be following up on them, right? They're not going to be sitting there. So it's a deeper problem than one side being lazy or something like that, but more subtle signs than that, I think are important. And I guess these are symptoms and signs and causes. The biggest thing that I saw that would disrupt sales and marketing's ability to align properly is the absence of a plan, a corporate plan and strategy. And what I mean by that, and it sounds really obvious, but usually companies will be like, no, we have a shared goal. We all understand that we want to hit, X million in ARR growth this quarter or this year. And, we roughly know how we're going to get there. But that roughly no part is the part that's really problematic. So when I talk about a plan, I'm talking about whatever form you choose to take. There's V2 Mom, the famous Salesforce approach. The key part of that one is the methods, right? How are we going to get there where everybody, sales leadership, marketing leadership, the CEO, product leadership, everybody, GMs across the enterprise all understand that, hey, when we think about achieving that revenue target or that profitability target, we're going to weight, growth in these regions this much and the launch of these new offerings this much. And we understand kind of at a deep level how to weight our effort and where we're going to be focused to drive those outcomes you want to drive. That creates a really nice foundation for everybody to really understand why we're doing what we're doing. So for example, one of the things that marketing struggles with, especially in larger businesses, is that they're not treating all parts of the business equally, not all parts of the sales team equally, all lines of product lines equally, and that upsets people. But if everybody sees the plan and says, oh, of course, marketing is going to be investing much more heavily here, here, and here than they are over there, that frees up marketing to do better work and to stay focused. Another sign or symptom is when marketing is not a center of knowledge about customers and audiences. I didn't say the center of knowledge, but oftentimes, marketing lacks credibility because, it's sales and product management who are viewed as the ones who really get the customers, and marketing doesn't. And that's on the marketing leader, in my opinion. Marketing has to earn that credibility by saying, okay, well, we're engaged in sales calls. We're doing research with sales and product management. We're interviewing salespeople to understand their selling process and what they're encountering. We're building those buyer personas, and we're becoming the center of knowledge about customers. If that's not there, they tend to be viewed as a support function that's just executing and not really strategic and driving growth.
Yeah, love that. And I want to have Sally, I want to ask you a follow-up question around that. We did throw up a second poll. So first question, how well do you think you understand sales and market alignment? Second question, how good you think you are at it right now? And so I'll share what we're seeing in the results there in a second. But I want to key in, Sally, on something that Jay mentioned around sort of having, one of the challenges and things that can be a warning sign is the absence of a corporate plan. Right? Because I think a lot of times people go into this and say, well, here's my demand gen campaign, right? And here's a tactical playbook of what I want my sellers to do on a daily, weekly basis. That's fine. But if you don't have that overarching strategy, as much as you may say, wow, I don't have time for that. Like, I got to get to work. I got to start building pipeline. You're going to have a mess for a long time if you don't put that in place.
Exactly. And, I think that it definitely goes back to that overarching plan, which is, again, where do you want your revenue to come from, and how are you going to get that revenue, and who's responsible for starting to build the pipeline in those early stages in those different components. And that's where I think we need to look at it. If sales is compensated on selling deals in the Fortune 1000 accounts, but they're getting leads in from, mid-market, of course, that's going to go awry, right? Yeah. And so that's where having that alignment is so critical. Again, especially the bigger you get and the more segmented you get in what you're doing on the sales side. I think some other early warning signs are low conversion rates, and then understanding why are you getting low conversion rates. If MQLs are not converting and moving into meetings or whatever your next stage is, why? Is it because, how your lead flow is happening? Is it because you're not getting them to the people, to the SDR team in a quick enough time frame? Is it because there's too many of them and you don't have enough SDRs, right? We're working with one company now where they segmented inbound and outbound, which is awesome for their size and what they're trying to do. But they have like 3 times as many inbound leads coming in for the amount of people that they have. Right. So, now we're not able to get to them, or get to them, and maybe we just do a first touch and then it goes awry. And we know it takes a lot more than one time, even for an inbound lead, right, to get to them. So, you've got to look at all of those things as to what's going on. It's really the details matter. And the devil's in all the details. And just saying we have a low conversion rate and it's SDR's fault may or may not be, but why is it and how can you fix it is really, the key there. And again, just sending it. One thing, we have a saying that I've been saying for years is that all inbound leads are not created equal. And so you need to do the proper tracking and measuring on your conversions down to that specific lead source to understand, and that helps drive what should be sent to your SDRs and what shouldn't, even though your SDRs are less costly than a field sales rep. If you never get a deal from, a trade show, why are you sending those to expensive people resources? Why would you not do marketing nurturing first before they ever get to an SDR, right? So really looking at that and understanding, what's the right path based on a lead source is critical, but you don't know that in the early stages until you start tracking and measuring and putting everything through and start being able to really identify and look at your conversion rates at that granular level.
I agree. Yeah. And I think, if you're doing, complex selling, let alone have sort of multiple decision makers in the process, having that foundation, having the environment for adjustments along the way as well, super, super important. All right. A couple things. One, we asked the next poll question, and I'm going to share the results here of how aligned is your organization today. You guys are pretty impressive. If you're answering this honestly, I expected to see a greater gap here, but the majority of answers were in the we are aligned. I would say if I think about like what the average is here, it might be a little less than we understand, but the gap was pretty small for this audience. So congrats to you. This is pretty impressive. I did want to get to Mary's question here around the impact of compensation, because this is a big one that comes up a lot. And Sally, I'd like to go back to you, and Jay, I want to have you answer this question as well. I mean, like typically you've got a sales and marketing team that are compensated differently, right? Sales shows up every month, every quarter, starting from zero, and has to, make their bread sort of by performance. Marketing can miss, in many cases, marketing can miss their number or focus on arts and crafts and vanity metrics, and they still make their paycheck. So how do you create accountability and alignment when the compensation is different, and how big of an issue do you see this in organizations?
We see it as a big issue in a lot of cases, and we can tell when the comp plans are radically different going in and working with companies. And, I think that what we like to see is at the higher levels, like maybe the VP of demand gen or the CMO needs to share some of those common goals that go farther than just we're developing a number of MQLs, right? Yeah. And it's like the same with the SDR team. It can't be just the number of meetings set. Over time, there's got to be a quality component, and it's got to be what are we trying to get to sales so that they can close it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that quality component that has to be added to the SDR compensation as well, so that creates more alignment. Maybe it's not your person that's actually, the demand gen manager, but again, somebody above them that has more components that's going to drive tighter alignment. And the SQL, I love that what Kirk just brought up about amazing what happens when the VP of marketing has an SQL goal in their incentive plan.
Yeah. Jay, I mean, what do you, from a compensation standpoint, we can talk about the variances, but I think to you, you can answer this however you want. I'd love to hear what you see working in terms of comp or bonus structures for either the CMO or her team relative to tying to pipeline contribution or sort of influence on deals that are closing.
Yeah, so this is a great topic, and I think it's a huge problem. And again, Sally, I think you nailed it. So, and the problem typically resides on the marketing side. In fact, I'm dating myself, but 10 years ago, I wrote a piece at Sirius that ended up being one of my most popular pieces. And it was titled, "Why the CMO Does Not Deserve a Seat at the Table." Of course,
Whoa.
it was a bit hyperbolic, but the point I made in that piece was that if the CMO is not willing to have the majority of their variable compensation tied to the same things that the sales leader's variable compensation is tied to, then honestly, they don't deserve a seat at the table. So yeah, the CMO, she needs to have a big chunk of her variable comp. And by the way, I'm an advocate, even though I am a marketing leader, of having more of the marketing leader's compensation be variable compensation than historically it has been. I don't think like 10%, 15% is enough. I think it has to be at least 25%, but typically much more than that is even better. And it should be tied to achievement of revenue targets, same as the sales leader, but also you can get to very specific demand metrics, like a personal KPI of mine that my variable comp was partially based on was percent contribution to pipeline and closed won business throughout the entire year, but also quarter by quarter. And believe me, that drives a lot of focus and a lot of alignment. And then certainly your demand leader and people who are focused on demand should be compensated similarly in terms of, not just volume, but percent contribution to pipeline and closed won revenue and achievement of overall targets. Others in marketing, it's a little bit fuzzier, right? You don't want your head of comms and brand necessarily to be tied, in a huge way to revenue targets or contribution to pipeline targets. There are other things that they should be focused on. But I find a lot of marketing leaders are reluctant to do that. And that the excuse is lame. It's like, well, we can't control what closes and doesn't close. That's what salespeople do. How could we possibly be expected? The point is that if you're doing demand well, you are making sales more productive. You're reducing sales cycle lengths, increasing close rates. And yeah, not every great lead you deliver is going to get closed on, but that's not the point, right? We're all on the hook. And that builds trust too, a lot of trust.
Yeah, it does. We're going to launch our third question here, which is sort of related to this conversation. And, oftentimes when we talk to marketers about sort of embracing revenue responsibility and tying some of their comp to revenue outcomes, like the biggest objection I hear pushback is like, well, I don't have control of what happens after the lead generation. I don't have control of whether the deal closes. Sally, I've never met a salesperson that has control over when those deals closes. So let's take control off the table and just say like, okay, well, what you have control over is a bigger, better pipeline, right? Like If you're not getting the close numbers you need more qualified, interested prospects. You need a higher volume with them. Don't expect 2x pipeline to hit your number. You're going to need 3, 4x. So do the work, right? And now we're having the aligned conversations. And so while we launched this last question around sort of like who needs to really step up to the table, AJ, I think of you as a CMO whisperer. And I think one of the things I think relative to like the CMO's role is thinking about the charter of the CMO, right? Because I think there's a lot of marketing leaders that may act more like campaign managers and more like marketing, like doing the marketing, versus I've heard more people talk about this idea of the chief market officer, like someone that's thinking about addressable market, someone that's thinking about what are the segments where we are more likely to drive deals. So it's not just glorified arts and crafts and likes and tweets and things that you can't buy a beer with, but it really is a true business partner. What are some attributes of marketing leaders that either you like to see that sort of lead better to sales and marketing alignment, or that allow marketing leaders to embrace more of that revenue responsibility?
Yeah, good question. And I think you were referring to our friend Latney. I love her Chief Market Officer title. In fact, I aspire to have that title someday. It's a Chief Marketing Officer. So it's again, a great question. First of all, I will say that in my experience, it's typically the marketing leader that has to work harder on sales and marketing alignment, largely because sales is going to execute and do what sales does regardless. And oftentimes marketing is the one that has to break out of either legacy perceptions of how marketing contributes and what its role is in the business, or just like legacy bad habits and things that have been going on for quite some time. Now, a good marketing leader is, it's cliche to say, but is truly strategic and truly does understand the market and takes responsibility for building that knowledge center of, what does our audience look like and how are we going after it. And I'm going to give two really specific examples of that show how deep I mean this has to go. But also, before I do that, the marketing leader, again, has to be the one, typically, in my experience, who steps up and says, you know what, we don't have a solid enough corporate strategy or plan in place. And I'm going to lead the effort to get that in place and step up and be willing to do that. And that's sometimes scary to do because you're like, well, I'm just the marketing leader. But if you're the marketing leader, of course, that's part of your responsibility to make sure that there's a corporate strategy and a plan that drives alignment that's in place. Now, the two examples I want to give are interesting ones because everybody's heard of personas. Everybody understands kind of vertical and horizontal segments and all of that stuff. Two things that I think work really well in driving alignment. And again, it's on marketing to drive this. One is to define what I call demand type. And that's just at the offering, like whatever that product is or services that we're selling and the audience we're selling it to at that pairing level, just getting agreement across sales and marketing. What type of demand are we trying to create? And there are three types of demand. One is called new concept. It's truly what it sounds like. You're selling something totally new. There are no budget line items for it. Your potential customers have never bought anything like this. They might not even be like really feeling the problem that you're solving for them. In that extreme scenario, and pretty rare scenario, sales has nothing flowing to them. There's no inbound, their pipelines aren't full. So that defines all sorts of things that are going to happen. So for example, marketing might say a slightly warm lead and a new concept type of demand is way better than a cold call. So we're making sales more productive, even with low qualified leads. The other end of the spectrum is established market. And I always use a company like Staples, right? Everybody has to buy papers and pens and desks and chairs. So it's a very competitive sale in a very competitive market. And guess what? Sales usually has a ton of opportunity flowing to them, but they're in competitive selling situations. Marketing's job changes entirely. If they are generating leads in that scenario, they better be super high quality because if they're not, they're going to get ignored. But really what marketing should be doing in that scenario is sales enablement, competitive intelligence, battle cards, helping to differentiate and helping to accelerate deals that are in pipeline rather than generating a lot of needs. And in between those two things are where we most of us are. New paradigm, right? You're offering a new way to do something they already do, but you have to communicate enough value that it overcomes perceptions of disruption. But the point is like having that conversation across sales and marketing of what type of demand are we trying to create here? And what are the implications on lead quality, on our go-to-market motion? Do we agree? Yes, that to me is the foundation of great alignment.
Love it.
Right?
We're almost 40 minutes in, so time is flying by. We're going to start running out of time here in a little bit. If you have additional questions for our great guests today, make sure throw those in chat. I'm watching the Q&A field as well, but I think throwing them in chat, make sure everyone can see those and other people can answer those as well. I want to share the results from our last poll around who do you think needs to put the most work into this. A couple people said marketing. Most people said equal work. But then there was an interesting thread that started in the chat here as well, Sally, around like, well, what about the CEO? What about, we can talk about sales versus marketing working together. I'm glad someone brought that up because when you've got executive alignment all the way to the top, when you've got a CEO and or a board, depending on the stage of your company, sort of mandating this level of cohesion, things tend to happen a little more swiftly, a little more productively. Talk about where you've seen success stories from alignment all the way to the top, CEO, board level, and sort of how that drives better sales and marketing alignment performance.
Yeah, I think that's when we've seen some of the best sales and marketing alignment performance is when the CEO is actively involved in understanding it and is bringing the sales and marketing leaders together to have those conversations, right? Or when they start seeing things, I think every CEO needs to have, and I think this is a challenge that we have in the tech industry in particular, is that many of the CEOs are so tech-centric and product-centric, and they don't necessarily get the sales and the marketing side. And so they don't get down to some of those details and brass tacks, and they're not keeping their eye on some of those areas that we had talked about earlier when you can start to see some warning signs that maybe things are going off off kilter here. And if we had CEOs that started the conversations, made sure that sales and marketing was aligned, and, it's not just, I wouldn't expect them to be on a weekly conversation, but certainly every time there's a new sales and marketing leader that comes aboard, that conversation is happening. Yeah. And then every year we know when sales plans change, how are we informing marketing, right? Mm-hmm. How does that change what marketing needs to be doing and their approach? And, and getting them involved and having dashboards for the CEO that show some of those early warning signs, I think is critical to getting them, but they need to want to be involved. And I see that sometimes is where we can also have the downside happen, is where they kind of hold up their hands. They are hoping that their sales and marketing leaders can hash this out, and it doesn't happen until one of them ends up getting fired.
Yeah. Super good point. We got about 10-ish minutes left. So last call for any questions that people may have from the audience for folks today. I'm curious, Jay, is this, the things we've talked about the last 40 minutes or so feel kind of universal, right? It feels like these are things that we've been talking about for a while. Have any of these variables or priorities changed since the pandemic began, especially since we've got more remote sales forces? We've got digital as a far stronger element of the sales and the marketing motions. Does it change? Has that changed anything fundamentally about what makes alignment work well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there have been any huge things that have changed the way, what causes sales and marketing to work well together due to the pandemic and working in a distributed environment. However, there are some things that have had ripple effects as far as I can see. Both in my own work, but also in talking to a lot of my CMO and sales leader friends. It just takes more effort, right? More communication becomes more important. We're not in an office together. You can't shout over the cubicle walls. You can't walk down the hallway and grab somebody. So you really have to kind of focus on effective communication and making sure you're gathering in the right ways and having the right conversations all the time. And one thing that I used to tell my CMO clients all the time is, make sure that you're joining sales meetings as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And that might sound obvious, but it's shocking to me how often that's kind of overlooked. And like, if they're not invited, they don't want to kind of, ask the sales leader to invite them, just ask and say, hey, I would love to sit in. I would love to be part of it. Also, sales meetings are the best place for marketing to communicate to sales. Marketing hosting their own meetings where they're announcing a bunch of stuff or communicating a bunch of stuff to sales just isn't that effective, right? You just don't get the level of engagement you do at the kind of the required sales meetings. So that's one bit of it. The other thing I'll say that is interesting is how effective demand gen has been impacted by the past year and a half plus. That's where I've seen a big shift, and getting an understanding of what that means is really important. Events went away, basically live events went away. And that was a huge source of demand. It was a huge way for salespeople to be really productive in short periods of time, engage mm-hmm. with audiences. Mm-hmm. Most CMOs I know did a good job of not having that budget taken away, because it's a huge part of the marketing budget, live events. And most of them were able to hold on to that budget, but all that budget flowed into creating better content, more content, digital channels. That's all great. At the same time, we're all spending more time in front of screens. We're not in airports and on airplanes as much and all of that. So what that's created is this environment where there's tons of really great content out there. Companies are doing great work in digital channels out there, and it's become increasingly difficult to break through all of the noise and really stand out and engage your audiences. So what I've been seeing happening is successful marketing leaders are pivoting towards greater and greater creativity, right? Exerting a point of view, being truly creative in their messaging, kind of focusing on the artful part of marketing. Some of them are struggling because they haven't effectively communicated why that's important now. We've all I think, and I'm part of the problem, I think, over-rotated on like demand gen is everything, and what that means is kind of narrowly defined. But again, benchmarking companies for 10 years at Sirius, the thing that moves the needle more than anything else in regards to demand gen are lightning strike and thunderclap events. Big awareness building events that exert your company's point of view, establishes the problem, that you're the ones who can solve that problem. That moves the needle in huge ways. And doing that with creativity and personality is what matters now. And again, I think CMOs just have to step up and make it clear. That's why, well, we have to do that and lead the way. Right?
Yeah. Sally, I want to ask you a similar question around what's changed, and I think I want to use it as a way to sort of shill for you. If you have any type of inside sales team or SDR team, if you need to be reading the annual SDR metrics and compensation report that comes out from the Bridge Group, I'm going to put a link to the 2021 report here in the chat, and we'll make sure people that get a link to that who are either weren't able to attend or watching this on demand. One of the headlines that came out of that report this year was that the pandemic didn't create the change; it accelerated pre-existing trends and conditions. Can you talk about some of those that you've seen that have been just exacerbated or accelerated in the last year and a half?
Yeah, so a lot of it goes back to what Jay was saying, is that you had to get really creative, because we saw and still see to this day, email rates, reply rates have plummeted. And phone rates have plummeted, not to the extent that email has. And what we are finding is where, pre-COVID, you never would think about prospecting to somebody on a cell phone that you hadn't talked to before. Mm-hmm. It is fair game for most people today, right? Yeah. So a lot has changed. The other thing that has changed is we saw a whole bunch of messaging, changes that had to occur. And I think the SDR teams probably were a little bit behind in some of this. And so where marketing could help out is really when do we pivot our messaging from a big picture? Marketing, I don't believe, are the right people to write SDR messaging. Right. That's the one-to-one, but they can help with the bigger picture and what's the overall sentiment that we're trying to get across, right? So when COVID first happened, we had to do a lot more empathy than we probably have ever had to do before in our life of an SDR and prospecting. And then some people, they were waited too long. And so your message was, coming across as being, wow, you are really deaf to this whole situation that's going on here. And then they kind of did it too long, right? As well. And we're still talking about, the pandemic and, and being too empathetic for too long. And so, we've gone through a lot of switches and changes over the last year in a very short order. And I think some guidance again on that would have been really helpful. And the understanding, and again, if you're tracking and doing your reporting, to see the switches between, email response rates fallen out the bottom, and phone working better if you're doing cell phone and actually being okay is the way to go.
Love it. Well, I want to give people a little bit of time before the top of the hour meetings we got to go to. I want to thank you both for being part of this. Last question I want to ask for both of you, just to sort of briefly answer. We've covered a lot of ground in the last 50 minutes. This is a complex, wide-ranging issue that is not a simple fix. There's no sort of magic bullet to address this. And I think depending on sort of where people are coming to this, we saw in our poll questions a fairly advanced level of people to feel like they get it and they're making good progress. For people that might be on the low end of that poll, for people maybe watching this on demand who are still trying to figure this out, who are scribbling furious notes, where do you start? What are some of the foundational elements to put in place to start to make progress, knowing that this is a journey, not always a destination, and that, just even by starting the process will help to improve alignment results? Jay, let's start with you, and then we'll let Sally wrap us up here.
Sure. So as we've already discussed, I think the foundation, a starting point, is building shared view, understanding of our audiences, our go-to-market strategy, that corporate plan, right? How, not just what are we going to achieve, but how are we going to get there together, right? What are the big rocks? And what's each of our scope of responsibility? That's foundational. I really do think a demand type discussion, like I talked about before, is really worthwhile because it sets up the foundation to even do things as simple as define what is a qualified lead in our unique situation. In addition to that, we haven't really touched on it too much, but targeting is really key in my opinion. And that's part of it too. I mean, it seems like it's a given, but in my experience, it usually doesn't go far enough. People agreeing like, oh, well, we understand who we're selling to and why. We're all on the same page, right? Usually not, though, I find, right? Really getting into the details, not just understanding who our buyers are, decision makers, influencers, really understanding the segments. But I like to use an approach that I call relative targeting, where you're not just saying, okay, well, we've defined our targets, but we're comparing them against each other as well to really find our sweet spot, right? Kind of using both external and internal criteria to figure out, hey, where is the wind really at our back? Where do we have the best opportunity as a business to really grow and achieve our targets? And where is a bit more of a struggle? And maybe that's a new vertical industry, for example, or a new geo. Not to say you're not going to invest there, but you're understanding what, again, and agreeing on what to expect out of it. Again, what that sets us up for is sales and marketing being on the same page about why you might be investing more effort and budget in one place than another place, which again drives better alignment over time. People aren't becoming resentful and bitter about not getting what they think they should get because everybody understands why we're operating the way we are. So to me, those are the foundations. And in this day and age, it's hard, but it always helps to get together if you can actually get to know each other, even if it's like a social Zoom hangout. You can do that sort of thing. And my advice for anybody in marketing is listen to a lot of sales calls. Most of us have Gong now. Listen to it like nonstop. I fall asleep most evenings, especially since I'm at a new company, listening to my sales reps' voices selling because I just want to absorb it.
That's real commitment if you're falling asleep listening to sales calls. I'm pretty impressed by that. A little bit terrified, but I'm mostly impressed. Sally, I mean, you gave a thumbs up on listening to sales calls. I think, empathy and understanding across the aisle, so to speak, on both sides, critical part of this. But if for those that are trying to wrap their heads around alignment, what do you consider a good starting point?
So actually that was going to be sort of mine, a little bit different approach is not only should marketing talk to sales reps and try to figure out what they do, what do they consider, the best prospect, what are people talking about and asking about, but then to actually listen in and participate in calls, in presentations, to hear firsthand what our prospects are interested in, concerned about, how are they responding to our messaging, real life, and to see what the sales team is really up against and doing. And I think that builds a whole level of understanding, and you get back trust and credibility on the marketing side when they're active and participating in those. And so it shouldn't just be the VP of marketing or CMO that's doing that, but people at a lot of different levels within marketing should be participating in those conversations and discussions with the sales reps themselves, not just the sales leaders.
Yeah, love it. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in a fairly short amount of time. I know we keep on going, but we need to let you guys are very, very busy, powerful people. We need to let you go. Jay, we got to get you back on vacation, man.
Go back to smoking.
Yes, go back. Thank you back. Thank you both for taking the time. I think this was great. We covered a lot of ground, some great insights. So Jay, Sally, thank you so much for doing this. We'll put some links to the SDR metrics and compensation report into the show notes. We'll try to find that post, Jay, about the CMO losing their place at the table. Because even though you said it was 10 years ago, it sounds pretty relevant to a lot of people still today. Thank you so much to everyone who attended for us live. If you're watching on demand, we'll make sure you get links to these pieces again. And we'll be back shortly with some more sessions. You can check out more content, best practice guides, on-demand webinars, research content, HeinzMarketing.com. And thanks everyone for watching. Jay and Sally, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.